to back my colleague up, and we've discussed this, I'd like to thank I'd like to thank the officials as well, because we've discussed this at length and also at committee. And if you look at the section within the bill itself, on page 45 on to 46, and this would be, as Deputy Troy has said, would be giving the oversight to the competent authority, which I think is the right thing to do, so that DAA would not be the arbiter and the final decision maker on who's in the scheme or not. But specifically, as Deputy Troy has said, it relates to not just the existing scheme and the voluntary scheme, but those who would be affected by, or may be affected by, the new runway when that opens, and we're aware of that. So that's why Amendment 88, which we're discussing in this block, we tried to improve the drafting of our amendment, which was passed at committee, when it said expand the existing noise insulation scheme to all homes affected by any and all flight paths into the airport, including those created by future developments at the airport. I understand why that would be too broad, and you could have someone on Cluckawn or someone in Waterford or whatever on approach to Dublin actually, applying to the scheme based on that language, and that would actually reduce the capacity to deal with to allow more people in the affected areas into the scheme. So that's why we actually put that in page 46, lines 1 and 2, to delete affected by any and all flight paths into the airport and substitute located within relevant noise contours. And there are, specifically published noise contour maps that we have, and that is very distinct. But it would still allow the competent authority to decide whether a person was in or not. So we're not actually saying we're allowing the competent authority to do its job, and to remove that function from DAA. I believe actually that's probably something that DAA themselves would welcome. But what my concern is, and the reason for the amendment that we passed at committee and for this change here, is for the residents and for people who are not opposing development of the airport and understand the economic importance and the 20,000 jobs, the 114,000 indirect jobs that are supported there and the livelihoods of it, but deserve, on the basis of the balanced approach, that their lives aren't impinged upon any further by this. So I think this is a very reasonable one. Now, I do understand in section 2 of the amendment that we put forward, and I think this was worthwhile, that we said the competent authorities should be responsible for evaluating the design and implementation of the airport's noise insulation scheme, with the view to ensuring maximum benefit for local residents. That's actually important. You see, when you take your one, which is 99, you're basically bringing in the existing scheme. Okay, and that's fine. You can't just leave it out there. You're responding to the request that Fianna Fáil put at committee to bring the existing scheme in, and I get that, and that's welcome. So that means those people are there. But then what we're saying is it would be responsible for evaluation, the design and implementation of the Airport Authority's noise insulation scheme based on the new on the new runway as well. In your amendment, and I respectfully say that it doesn't allude to that, and I think we need to be prescriptive on that element of it to give comfort to residents to know that it's not just the existing scheme, that the scheme can be expanded. And I know that your officials in explanatory notes, and you have given notes to say that you believe in your amendment that it would permit that, and that the competent authority could expand it. I believe, though, that we need to be a bit more prescriptive, and it is no harm to have that in the legislation. Now, I understand that we're also saying the competent authority must publish an evaluation immediately following the design of a new noise insulation scheme, and no later than 1 year following the commencement of the new scheme. Look, there are pieces like that that we put in that what the evaluation would consider. That may be too prescriptive. It's not for us necessarily to say to experts there that you need to do A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So for the second part of it, I think that if further work is required on the second part of it, well then I think that could be done at Shannon stage. But I think it would be crucially important for people for buy-in to this process that the insulation scheme, that it is clear in the legislation that the insulation scheme can and will be expanded as decided by the noise regulator, along the lines of the other aspects of the bill that we've managed to get through, like the WHO, the noise guidelines, and all of those things that have been an improvement to the legislation that was published in the first instance. This is crucially important, and crucially important for those communities who will be beside the existing runway and in the flight paths, but who will be in the flight path of the new runway as well. So does it need a bit of additional work? Yes, it does, and I think we've tried to do that by our Amendment 88, and that was actually tabled in the spirit of cooperation from lengthy discussions that were had with your department to try to find a way forward on this. So I think we have removed, by deleting affected by any and all flight paths into the airport and substituting that with located within relevant noise contours, have shrunken those who may potentially get into the scheme. So we're only talking about those who are in that. So I think, if I might say so, and respectfully, that Deputy Troy has tabled a very relevant and helpful amendment here that will improve the situation. If something needs to be done further down the line, if we're being too prescriptive as to what we want the competent authority to do, well, then I think that's something that could be looked at Shannon stage. But I think it's crucially important that we are prescriptive and descriptive in relation to the noise insulation scheme, because people need confidence that that scheme can and will be expanded on the basis of how communities are affected by the expansion of the airport.
Thank you, Deputy O'Brien.
I appreciate what you're saying, but you're talking. What we're talking about in your amendment, by removing the section that we put in at committee, and that was debated in great detail, and actually in a decent spirit, I might add, and you were there, and I would say that, is that what 99 does, or what your Amendment 87 does, is, one, remove that in its entirety. And then by bringing in effectively 99, you're bringing in the existing scheme, and you're talking about, that a review, that someone could review the effectiveness of the existing scheme. We're not talking about extent or about expansion. So that's not something and I mean this respectfully, that could be accepted, because we need to see that it's there. Now, I think we could certainly work. I'm not saying that everything is perfect. We have done, by Amendment 88, tried to improve the scope, and I think it does that. So by leaving the section in, and if you wanted to bring then an amendment subject to discussions that we were having to improve that section in the Shannon, absolutely fine. But what you're asking us to do here this evening is to remove a very important section that was passed at committee. Imperfect, I would grant you that. And that's why 88, if we pass that by the extent, that means that it improves it. Let that go, withdraw your amendment, let that one through, and then work on an amendment to that section in the Shannon that either you or we would bring forward by way of agreement to agree. But I can't remove that. That would be taking the holding out. And we could agree on an agreed shared amendment on the Shannon to improve particularly Part 2 of that section. And we would do that. But you can't, like that was a really important part of the committee meeting. We'd be removing it in its entirety. And I, for what it would be on the public record, we give a commitment that you withdraw 91, let that section stand, pass 88 to improve it, and then we would work on an agreed change to that at the Shannon. But at the moment, all we're doing, if we accept your one, is saying the existing scheme is in, and that's pretty much it. And I think I know that will be a problem.
Just for